Regular Show is a pretty wacky cartoon that ranges heavily from being pretty weird to extremely weird to just plain normal. The show has made over 210-minute episodes, and it ran for like 7 years on Cartoon Network. And after running a show like this for so long with a dozen different writers on the team, they were naturally bound to have some retcons or contradictions. While a ton of episodes showcase the park being totally demolished and then getting completely repaired the next episode, these don't really count as retcons in my opinion. What I'm counting as a contradiction is a detail that was clearly established in one episode and then clearly changed in another. The park has the power to magically fix itself in its entirety by the next episode, and no one has to pay for any of the damage. This trend is very consistent throughout the whole show. So today I wanted to share with you 5 different contradictions in the show that have kept me up at night for at least a year. Number 1. Gene pranking the park. In episode 75, Prankless, Gene, the manager of the rival park, waged a prank war against our main characters. By the end of the episode, Musl Man makes him vow to never prank the park ever again. And in episode 88, Gene shows up again and reminds the audience about their deal. But in episode 50, Gene pranks the park by taking their statue of the park's founder. This retcon kinda annoys me a lot, actually. Gene was introduced as loving pranks and vowing to never prank the park again. So while they got one part of his character right, it still makes no sense for him to do this to them. What makes this even worse is that apparently Gene stealing the statue is a yearly tradition for him. So not only did Gene go back on his promise in this episode, he has done so multiple times. I guess you could defend this by saying, well, the statue is on their property. It's not actually a prank because it's theirs now. And technically they didn't even prank them. They stole their statue. That's not a prank, that's just illegal. Well, stealing is considered a prank in the show, and even if the statue is on their property, it's not suddenly yours, Gene. Number 2. Skips' backstory. Skips is a strong, immortal Yeti who has lived for a couple of centuries, and his immortality is explained through several different episodes across the show. In episode 5, Free Cake, it's established that on his birthday, Skips has to perform a ritual in the middle of the night in order to retain his immortality. In the same episode, we're also introduced to 5 giant floating babies called the Guardians of Eternal Youth. They're the ones who granted Skips his immortality, and also Gary's here. He's their chauffeur. Mordecai and Rigby disrupt the ritual, and the babies have to take away Skips' immortality. However, Rigby just so happens to have some chocolate cake with him, and he trades it to save Skips' life. In the episode Fist of Justice, we learn more about his relationship to the Guardians and why Skips is immortal in the first place. Skips was granted immortality so he can fight their evil brother Clorkbane every 157 years. Because he can't fight him barehanded, the babies have also given Skips the Fist of Justice, golden gauntlets that use video game controls for some reason. There's also pretty lengthy animation of them screwing on the gauntlets and stuff. It's pretty neat. Anyway, Mordecai and Rigby take over the fight and defeat Clorkbane for Skips, and the episode ends. So a lot of stuff was established in this episode, and a lot of it is really interesting. But what kind of sucks is that this episode pretty much retcons the entire 5th episode. If Skips was granted immortality to fight Clorkbane, then why did he need to perform the ritual? It doesn't seem like it's necessary at all. Mordecai and Rigby made a bargain with them and then poof, back to normal. So why give him a ritual to perform if he didn't really need to do it, and he needs to save their lives in a few more years? It's also really weird how they don't have any reservations towards literally killing Skips. Like, Skips fought Clorkbane at least twice by now, so it's strange how none of them are like, man, I really like Skips, we've known him for like 400 years. They also seem to retcon Skips hating his birthday. And Free Cake, Skips didn't want to celebrate his birthday because he had to do the ritual. But at the start of Fist of Justice, Skips is celebrating his birthday. Like, what the heck happened here? Minor correction here. After rewatching the episode again, I don't think Skips necessarily hates his birthday. He was just angry that his party was at the same time as his spirit dance. So technically, not a retcon in that sense. Still though, it's pretty weird how no one else attempted to throw Skips a party before 8 o'clock before, and strange how Skips never told anyone about this before. So basically, the entire plot of Free Cake was practically retconned in Fists of Justice, even though that was the episode that introduced just about everything to do with Skips being immortal. My guess for how this happened is that they wrote Skips to be immortal in Free Cake, but didn't have a solid enough idea yet, so they rewrote the surrounding details to be a bit more interesting. And you know, I don't really mind this at all. I don't expect the writing team to have every minuscule detail planned out for the next 5 years. These episodes are 2 years and 60 episodes apart. Do you really think you're gonna like every idea they thought up 2 years ago? And also, I didn't particularly like the episode Free Cake anyway, so you know. In episode 73, Diary, Skips reveals the reason why he skips. It's because he loved to skip with the love of his life, and he skips every day to honor her memory. Then in episode Exit 9B, Skips has his memory wiped, and Rigby gets him to remember her. I'm bringing this up because while regular show contradicts itself at times, they do have a lot of consistency. Clorkbane kills one of the 5 babies, Archibald, and for the rest of the entire show, whenever they're all seen together, it's just the 4 of them. They killed him for a dumb little gag, and then remembered that for the entire show. Also in Exit 9B, they just magic blast the Fist of Justice onto Skips. They didn't need to have all the setup. I mean, they did do this with Mordecai and Rigby, so I guess they are consistent in some way. In episode 138, Skips' story, we finally learn the lore behind the love of his life, Desdemona. In Diary, her appearance was drastically different, but it's not that important really. Basically, he went to high school with her, Gary, the babies, and Clorkbane. That's how they all knew each other. The episode is a pretty typical love story with the B-plot of fighting a giant evil baby thrown in the mix. What's interesting is that the writers remember to bring back Archibald, the baby that they killed in the Fist of Justice. They are extremely consistent in the weirdest ways.
Let me at him! Archibald, don't be a hero!
The major contradiction is that the Fists of Justice were also created in this story, back when video games didn't exist. So the gauntlets being controlled using buttons and a joystick were rewritten here. Also, the fists can just rocket boost themselves onto Skips. No lengthy setup required, I guess. So what's really interesting about all of Skips' backstory is that basically every episode has retconned some really important detail of the previous episode. I guess this does make Skips' backstory consistently inconsistent. Number 3, Rigby can't play basketball. In episode 46, Slam Dunk, Mordecai and Rigby play a game of basketball against Musl Man and High Five Ghost, and they clearly suck and are not good at the game. Then in the episode Bank Shot, Rigby is suddenly a master of making bank shots. Okay, in the show's defense, Mordecai and Rigby do gain some magical basketball powers from the god of basketball and become master basketball players and can fly into space. But in this episode, it's established that Rigby was a master bank shot player since childhood, so it doesn't make any sense why he's so incompetent when making shots in basketball. And what's even weirder is that the god of basketball shows back up in the bank shot episode, so the show acknowledges that this episode exists, but apparently doesn't remember what happens in it. Number 4, Musl Man Is Jewish. So this is an interesting fact about Musl Man that I don't think many people know about, because it isn't really said in the show. In the Christmas special, he wears a blue sweater with a dreidel on it, he steps on a glass when he gets married, and his last name is Sorenstein. And for those who don't know, Stein is a common suffix for a Jewish last name apparently. I just found that out while making this video. You learn something new every day. And then in another Christmas episode, he just outright says he celebrates Hanukkah.
But wait! I haven't done the Sorenstein Hanukkah tradition of skiing down a big slope in my underwear!
That's sad. While this is a really neat trait about Musl Man, he also doesn't follow his religion that closely, as Jewish people are prohibited from eating pork, and Musl Man has eaten pork in multiple episodes. Most notable episodes are in Last Meal, where he enters a hot dog eating contest where he has to beat death in order to preserve his own life, and every meat burrito, or he eats a burrito that contains every kind of meat inside of it. If I'm speaking honestly, I really like this detail, and I think the writers do too. If they didn't, they obviously wouldn't have taken the time to write and animate him doing Jewish traditions. However, I do sort of wish they had kept this facet of his life a bit more consistent. My guess as to how this discrepancy happened is that the writers wanted to make Musl Man Jewish by writing subtle hints across spans of episodes, but didn't know enough about Judaism to write an accurate depiction of their religion. Granted, I didn't know that Jewish people couldn't eat pork before this, and other than the glass thing, I didn't notice the other obvious hints either, so I think this fact will go over a lot of other people's heads as well. And you know, I clearly don't know much about Judaism either, so I don't know if there's some division or subgroup where some people choose to eat pork or not, so maybe it's not as bad as I'm making it out to be. Write your thoughts in the comments, I really want to know. Honorable mentions: Musl Man's shirt. In episode 210, it's revealed that Musl Man's blue shirt is his one and only favorite shirt. The gang spend the whole episode trying to create another copy of it right after destroying the original. However, in previous episodes, there are instances where Musl Man's shirt gets ripped, shrunken, or completely destroyed. So this is an honorable mention because there are reasonable explanations for this. Like when the shirt gets ripped up, you could assume he sewed it back up later. And in the episode where this problem happens, they try to replace it, but they ran out of his shirt. So in universe, there are multiple versions of his shirt. He just had to buy a new one whenever his old one got damaged. Despite that reasonable explanation, this still ruins the plot of the episode for me because it reminds me of all the times his shirt got completely wrecked and he didn't seem to care, not one bit. In episode 55, Skips versus Technology, Skips has a hard time using a computer and can barely understand very basic instructions like how to open up the internet. But in episode 33, Skips uses the internet by himself to look up the Playco Arm Boy. So this is an honorable mention because it's a cut and dry retcon. I also found this out by looking through his wiki page. I can't really claim the credit for this one. But something I can add though is that while Skips is bad at computers, he is strangely good at video games. Skips isn't implied to be bad at computers because he's old and hasn't kept up with the modern era, so it's kind of weird how the only thing he seems to know about is how to play video games. In episode 59, he helped Mordecai get into grand finals of a video game tournament. In episode 20, he also knew about the hammer, the final boss of a video game. So I think there are a couple of reasonable explanations for this. One, Video Game Wizard takes place 4 episodes after Skips versus Technology, so while they did set up Skips as being bad at computers, he could have had a cool anime training arc where he got really good at video games. 2, the Fists of Justice use video game controls, which means that Skips already has a lot of experience playing video games through using the fists. 3, playing video games doesn't necessarily translate into being good with computers. I mean, at Skips' level, it technically does because he can't comprehend how to open up the internet, but for the most part, it's not a one-to-one thing. Number 5, Benson leaving the park. So Benson is the park manager who loses his temper very easily. For the most of the show, he's usually yelling at Mordecai and Rigby and often says he'll fire them for slacking off, but he never does in the end. In episode 66, Busted Cart, Mordecai and Rigby destroy the park's cart. Benson has to go to the cart dealership to get it fixed, or else he'll get fired. Mordecai and Rigby sneak into Benson's car to help him with the driving so that he can sleep. But along the way, they stop to play some video games at an arcade. Mordecai and Rigby spend way too much time there and now won't make it in time before the dealership closes. And when Benson pulls them out of the arcade, he rightfully gives them an earful, but towards the end, he starts to break down.
When are you two gonna learn that your actions have consequences? Consequences that affect other people, like me. Don't you two understand? I'm about to lose my job. You may not care about keeping your jobs, but I care about keeping mine. Because if I lose my job, I have nothing. Do you hear me? I have nothing.
Now, Benson is completely justified for yelling at them here. For all the times where he's been a jerk for no reason, the scene really makes you sympathize with Benson. It's genuinely really touching. But in episode 84, 150-piece kid, there's a scene that sort of muddies this moment for me. So Benson used to be part of an extremely famous band, but got kicked out in place of a robot. Supposedly, the robot is the only one who can play a certain song, but by the end of the episode, Benson plays it, and everyone's happy. And then, his former band offers him a spot back in, and Benson refuses them, saying this.
No, Augie. I don't need rock and roll's endless party. 'Cause the park is my rock, and managing it is my role.
So there's a lot to say about this moment, and I think it's fine by itself. Like, it totally makes sense for Benson to refuse because they replaced him with a robot and basically pushed him into obscurity. I mean, if I was Benson, that would be my reason to reject them. But what makes this scene in Busted Cart a contradiction for me is that Benson isn't worth nothing without the park. He can easily start a career in drumming by joining a different band and be super successful, but he doesn't do that. Like, I totally get not loving the party life and going to concerts and whatnot. I'm not into that either. But Benson can totally be a drummer and not do the whole partying thing, right? And that reason feels like a total lie because there's another episode where Benson loves to party, but he ends the rejection by saying that the park is his rock, meaning that he actually likes to work there. Hearing him say this feels a bit strange because it probably sucks working there because of Mordecai and Rigby, but who am I to judge what he likes to do? Fast forwarding to the last episode, the epilogue shows everyone moving on from the park. Mordecai is an artist, Rigby is a stay-at-home dad, and Musl Man is Musl Man. Benson, however, still works as the park manager, with him and Skips the only two still working there, meaning that Benson really did enjoy managing the park, and the whole speech wasn't a lie after all. However, there is one more episode we need to talk about. Episode 23, Benson Be Gone. Benson gets demoted to a staff member and eventually gets fired, but he's totally fine with that. He's jumping for joy. But later in that episode, he comes back and feels content with his life. Early on in the show, it was established that Benson would quit his job if he had the chance, but he's only staying because he looks at Utopia, a former park manager, and thinks to himself that he doesn't want to be a loser like him. But I think that exemplifies why this is a contradiction, because even then, Benson was capable of way more. He doesn't have to work at the park to not feel like a loser. So the only thing that would prevent this from being a contradiction is if we actually see why Benson is so attached to the park. But we never get to see that explanation. And this sucks because every other character is so developed and thought out, so it doesn't make any sense why the showrunners never had this idea to flesh out this aspect of Benson's life. I think that's my real main issue I have here. While a lot of these contradictions are pointless and stupid, they do play up to the show's humor. Like the showrunners did it on purpose to get a laugh out of you. But this one feels different. It feels incomplete. I don't know why Benson decided to work at the park for the rest of his life, and because of the strange writing of the show, I genuinely don't think he knows either. I could go on and list some more contradictions I could find, but I got all the ones I wanted to talk about, so thank you for hearing me out. If you found something I didn't cover, leave a comment or whatever. Anyway, goodbye.